Welcome to the Gen AI podcast, where the future meets fun and tech talk trends. Get ready to dive into the world of artificial intelligence like never before. Your hosts, Dale, Alan, Greg, and Val, are about to take you on a wild ride through the AI universe. So, buckle up, tune in, and let the AI adventure begin.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Gen AI podcast. This is episode 5, and I am joined by Greg Lawton. How are you doing, Greg?
A bit tired, buddy, but I'm good. I'm looking forward to our chat.
Is it a break from changing nappies?
It is. It's kind of humbling when in one area you're like, oh, okay, right, how do we build this AI? How do we tweak this? And on the other, a human is pooing on you.
The joys.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, and I love the fact that you're going through the motions of parenthood. It's a joy to behold. I think you gotta have the fun and take the pain with it, I think.
Yeah.
But look, we have a fantastic and just to give, I guess, the listeners some of the background of how we're doing this. Most of the things we do on this podcast is using generative AI. So AI generates the topic for the episode, and it's generated the data dilemma, AI secret sauce. So we don't know where we're going to go with this, Greg. I think we had a couple ideas, but data is absolutely key for AI. But there's a lot of mystery around data, what it is, who owns it, is there really data IP? There's some interesting news as well that we can share around OpenAI being sued. There's also roles within data that are confusing to a lot of people. But I think we want to hone in on the construction sector primarily because that's where the listeners or we believe the audience on this podcast comes from. And there's also, it's better to have a use case where we can actually apply to a specific sector. So where do you want to start? There's so many places we can go with this.
I want to start on data ownership because I actually think it poses a very interesting dilemma, and I don't know the answer, by the way. I don't know the answer of what it is, but we can start with the OpenAI thing. So I read a news article, I think it was last week, saying that OpenAI was getting sued. I believe it was by either the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, saying that it had used their publications to train its algorithms on. Now, here's my question there. Does that mean that they can sue people who read their articles who then go on to create written content in their careers for the education that they've provided people? Like you see the sticking point here. It's almost like, where do you draw the line?
Yeah.
It's like if you're going to put all of your data in the public domain, yes, you can have some terms and conditions about it, but tracing indistinct learning is a very difficult thing to do.
Yeah, I agree, because I guess that at the heart of it is maybe capitalism that's driving it all, because if we said that all information data, let's say, is freely available, and maybe we should make a distinction between what's information, what's data.
Yeah.
Because if it's all freely available, then there wouldn't be an issue, right? But someone's being paid to write that article, and then whether it's the New York Times or Wall Street Journal, they're making money, they're making revenue out of that article or the articles they're publishing. And so I think that's probably at the heart of it. But maybe ownership, you're right, is the key bit here that we want to discuss up front. I mean, is there actual ownership? Because if I go to university, I pay for my education, I've learned content, theory, practical information that's been put together over years, centuries, by people that have come before us. They're not being paid. They were once paid, but then do I have to continuously then pay the institution when I apply it afterwards? I don't know where it starts and stops.
Exactly, and this is. I'll give you an example, which is so in most software contracts and in most NDAs, so non-disclosures agreements that exist in the construction industry, there's a term definition called confidential information, and the term definition usually is confidential information is the information and any derivative works thereof. So that's the official language. Now, here's the thing: your university will have terms and conditions that say RIP is RIP and any derivative works thereof. Well, then you have to define what a derivative work is, and that normally isn't defined, by the way. It's left open because I'd be like, okay, is a derivative work the essay you submitted because you went to a lecture and therefore you submitted? Is it an article you wrote on your personal blog because of your education at the university as you're going through? Or is it once you're in employment afterwards and you are then doing work for an employer that also has that same term that basically says we own all IP you create whilst you're at work and any derivatives thereof? How does the university and the employer clash together, and who owns the IP? Now, these are all human things, and generally, from what I've seen in IP law, at least in software in the construction space, universities don't have any claim on anything you produce after university. If you work for an employer, the IP is owned by that employer. That's because it's the latest contract you sign, etc. The interesting thing is whether or not this changes because it's not a person. It's
Yes.
a machine algorithm. Arguably, I'd be going, well, why does it matter? Because we're talking about ownership of the inputs, not ownership of the process or the output. And by the way, you could go, well, how can you have ownership of people? I own me. Legally, I own me. No one can own me because we don't have slavery. I own me, so therefore I own the works that I do, etc. That kind of thing. So this is where I'm going to find that lawsuit super interesting, because I don't actually think that the papers are suing open space because they fundamentally believe we have this position. I think they're suing to see what side the court lands on. I think it's one of these, what they call flagship cases where it sets precedent.
Yeah, I agree. And the interesting thing is, if we then apply that to the construction sector or projects in general, too, I guess there has been this debate amongst various people around, the liberation of data and, making it open source in the construction industry. And I get the idea that, if we do share data from all the way from government through the supply chain on how projects are being delivered, everything from how foundations are being laid, pipes are being laid, groundworks, all the way through to buildings and paintings and electrics and all that, through to the commercials, the costs. Maybe costs are the one area that you want to preserve, but risks, schedule, commercial specifically, to improve the way projects are delivered and the outcomes of those projects. I get there's definite advantage to advance the way we deliver projects. However, there is this, and I don't know if it's misguided or not, but there's a view that there's certain IP and there's value in data, in holding data. Now, you smile, you smirk when I say that.
Yeah.
Come on, share your thoughts.
One person's trash is another person's gold. Is what I'd say there. And what I've seen people land on both sides of the fences. So I've actually had a prospect come to me, like someone that wanted to buy our software, and say, so how much are you going to pay me for putting my data into it? And we have some rigorous things where we don't actually take customer data and learn from that. Like it's theirs. But he was like,
Yeah.
but I'll happily. Then they were like, I'll happily give you my data, but how much are you going to pay me for it? And the answer is, I think I was like, I'll give you $100. Like it's basically worthless, because of the state it's in, just because of the volume of, their data would add like 0.01% to the database we already have. So it's kind of like law of diminishing returns.
Yeah.
But on the other extreme, I've seen people who, are promoting for the release of their costing and commercial data. And the people advocating for this are not normally in commercial. And I'm like, you and I know that that literally is the golden source of how to beat people on bids. So I'd be like, you don't want to be sharing that kind of stuff. So I think there's a spectrum.
Yes, agreed. If we break out commercial into cost elements of commercial, forecasting, bidding, etc. So the financial aspect of commercial and the contract side of commercial. I think the contract administration side of commercial could be cleared up using that data and terminology. Specifically, when you think a lot of the sector works on NEC, right? And you get accepted programs being come in, and what does the Z clauses say, and the application of all of the clauses in the contract to progressing. Because a lot of the times, yes, and the argument does go back to, who pays ultimately. But if you do apply the contract in terms of how it was written, what was agreed, then I think you'll be in a better place having that data freely available, so that the algorithms can help you, specifically if you've written in exactly what should be done. Now, I've had a different discussion with someone else around, we could go into blockchain and have self-executing contracts and all that kind of a thing. But the key here is, can we unlock data, commercial contract data, so that it doesn't become a stumbling block? Or maybe even a step before that, Greg. What if we used the data available and the scope of the work to actually use machine learning AI to write the contract that best fits the deliverable for that project? So in other words, you're not taking a stock standard off the shelf here and trying to make it fit. You're going in the context of delivering this project. Here's the scope. This is what we want to do. These are the suppliers we want to use. Please write up the terms that best suit this setup, so that we can then go and deliver this project.
Oh, absolutely. That's being done nowadays. Like that's a fairly simple use case to start to execute. But what I'd say at the core of this, what I'm trying to say is, what are you trying to achieve? And I don't mean like, oh, I'm trying to be able to write this clause or that clause. I mean, like, take it the level above. Like AI in this sense, AI is just an automation technology. It's a very, very advanced one that can do some very cool stuff, but it's an automation technology in that it increases the productivity of people. So somewhat where someone has gone, I want you to do this, and it does something. Just like you go, I want to move that load from there to there, and a crane does it if you control it. In that sense, I'd be like, right, if you really look at it from the cold light of day, like what is the economic advantage of doing this? Now, it is unbelievably difficult to get investments through, capex spending through, on hypotheticals. So, for example, we could write clauses better and therefore suffer less, costs later on in liquidated damages, etc. Because the answer back to that is, why aren't you doing your job? Like, I employ commercial people, so I don't have to bother with that. But it will take us 8 weeks to draft this contract, and it will cost you 400,000, or we can do it in 2, and it will cost you 300,000 because we still have to pay. I just made the numbers up. Then I'm like, okay, I save 100,000, and I also save 6 weeks, which helps me. Now, the reason I'm talking about that, about the use case, because it's kind of like you go from there into the data, and then I'd be like, okay. So, for example, I just come to mind. I could imagine that if NEC4 built a platform where people could administer NEC contracts online, so they could. I'm talking message counterparts. Forget all the payments and trigger. To me, that's not really solving a problem that's in the industry. Like, and I've been very honest with the blockchain stuff. There isn't a problem that exists that blockchain is the ideal solution to solve in my mind. That's trying to get a tech and fit it to a problem, as opposed to there actually being a real problem. It takes milliseconds to send payments. It's more the process of administering that people want to send that payment. And you could go, well, blockchain stumbles that. People find ways around that because there's reasons people don't want to send payments. Anyway, I digress. Like, if NEC4 literally had a contracts messaging exchange, so it was private and secure, and it's where you sent formal things rather than emails, then do you know what they could do? They could do an anonymized analysis of which clauses are causing the most problems. And then based on that, they could make it better over time or suggest amendments and things like that to make that process smoother. Now, this isn't an AI thing. That's just good shared data between, but you see how they're very, very different stuff. And I think that what's fantastic about the world we live in is that we do not need to find the right answer.
Yeah.
The invisible hand of the market will decide what the right answer is, because either companies will go, I'm just not sharing my data, at which point okay, or they'll go, it's just not that useful. I'm not paying the money for it. Or they'll go, there's a blank check. Just literally charge me anything you want because this is super valuable. And the market will figure out what the right answer is.
Yeah, and that's the great thing about what we're trying to do. I think we're exploring, which avenues and which lenses to apply, and I guess giving perspective to the audience as well is the key one here. But we spoke a little bit earlier about distinguishing between the difference between what data and information is. Do you want to give it a stab?
Well, there's lots of great definitions online. You're putting me on the spot here. I personally, I'd look at data as just raw numbers in a file, and information as data in context. So
Yes.
I've got contextual understanding about what that data is, applies to, or has importance of. Information is not intelligence. Intelligence is then the so what? What is the optimum scenario? What does this mean? So I'll give you an example. If you sent me just a spreadsheet of costs, I'd be like, cool. All right. But then if you were like, this is from your competitor, this is the bid they're putting in, this is the cost that they've put against these items, I'd be like, first of all, I'd be like, is this legal? But let's put that aside. That is more information. I'd be like, wow, that's in context, right? That's now suddenly relevant and valuable to me. And then the intelligence would be going, they can't do better than this, and the customer wants lowest cost. If you can beat that in these areas by getting to this cost level, you'll win. That to me is intelligence. And
Yes. So as we said at the top of this episode, a lot of what we do is generative AI, and I literally just typed into ChatGPT, what is the difference between data and information, and almost gave me verbatim, Greg. It might have been listening to you. Data refers to the raw facts and figures. Information, on the other hand, is data that has been processed, organized, analyzed, or interpreted to make it meaningful and useful.
boom.
So there you go. 10 out of 10 for you today, Greg, or 2 out of 2.
I can stay in my job. I can do my job. I'm not replaceable yet.
Well, this is if ChatGPT can be believed, right? So no, I think it's fairly well known and concise, the differences, but not everyone understands the differences, particularly those that are new to data, generative AI, machine learning, etc. So it's good we clarify
Let
that.
me challenge you up. I want to know, Dale, like on the side of kind of who owns the data argument, what
Yeah.
do you think there? Like,
So maybe I'm a little bit more liberal about it. I don't actually think anyone can really claim ownership to data, because whatever you've got from someone else, right?
mhm.
And whether you got that for free or paid, eventually it was free at some stage. Like if you
I'm going to challenge that. You're correct philosophically,
yeah
but I think it's the level of traceability. Because, for example, if we created a spreadsheet in your company of
yeah
costs that you could achieve, whilst you and I would be pulling on prior experience and working with prior clients and all of this, the spreadsheet would say created by Dale and Greg on 8th of Feb in your office. And I'm pretty sure that if a competitor walked in and emailed that to themselves, you'd be like, that's mine. So I'd be like,
yeah.
maybe there's a where it was created thing there.
So I do take that point. I guess on a philosophical and general wide scale, if it's not something personal to you that someone's copying, just at large. I guess I'm speaking from an angle of improving the way projects are being delivered,
Mm-hmm.
right? Not from an individual person data ownership perspective, but from an industry perspective. I think we should look at it that we own the data collectively, and how do we find that the ways in which we can share that data. I don't know the answers to that, but that's my general view. When it comes down to the specific case you mentioned, if I create something, yes, I absolutely feel that I own what I've created,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I do agree with what you're saying, but I think my answer is more sort of general from an industry perspective,
Well,
maybe
let's
specific to
take your
construction.
general answer then, because here's where I'm going to get unbelievably specific for a second. So,
I love
in
it.
in the UK, you've got the Infrastructure Projects Association, Infrastructure Projects Authority, which is part of the UK Treasury, which is
Yep.
tasked with the oversight and benchmarking of the capital spend that the British government do, and I think they're spending about 200 billion over 5 or 10 years, something like that. The point of thinking about the industry as a whole, I think that is the ultimate client. So in this case, the government can have that position, because if you think about it, you've created a competitive market. There are many contractors, there are many consultants, and they're fighting to survive. That's the whole point of competition. Like,
Yeah.
if one rules all, everyone else dies because they want to earn money. So in a competitive dynamic, to me it's unbelievably difficult to start getting people to behave philanthropically unless there's some kind of overarching, the playing field is equal for everyone kind of thing. And for me, the playing field is equal for everyone is a government thing. So the US has also just done the same, but essentially created the same as an IPA. I think that the IPA has such an amazing opportunity to start to change the requirements of data collection in its projects so it can collect data centrally, the exact same that the NHS did. So there's a company called Genomics England, which is essentially it's the NHS's AI division, and they use anonymized records that the NHS has to run analysis to predict genetic conditions. And I remember one of them, which was there are many cancer drugs that you can be given, but depending on your genetics, depends on how good each drug is for your condition. And the only way that they had before AI came about was to just test them on you and see. But you know this, if you've got cancer, speed is a problem. So you want to find the drug that fits you as fast as possible. What they can do now, because of that data set, is they can analyze your DNA and just say that's the drug that works for you and do it like that. So NHS has already done this kind of stuff. Imagine if the IPA said, all government projects, this is what you now have to submit. And it goes beyond the benchmarking they do now, because they've done some fantastic benchmarking, but into like AI. And here's the other thing. The British government are setting up AI divisions because every government's gone, this is going to be a world leading thing and a capability. So I just think we exist in such an opportunity whereby the individuals at a company level can do what they can do. But if we're talking about data ownership and data information and data value, I actually think the ultimate governments could completely change the paradigm dependent on how ambitious they want to be.
Yeah,
And they've done
absolutely.
this before, by the way. Do you remember this whole safety thing?
Yeah.
They've done it before.
Yeah, absolutely. But so if I can respond to that, I think you're right. In today's world, people view ownership of data as competitiveness. I'm more competitive because I own the data. I actually don't think that's where the value lies. I think you can liberate the data, but your competitiveness is actually the application of how you use that data to draw out the information.
Mm-hmm.
That's
I'd agree with
that's
that.
my challenge back, is to say, actually forget about owning the data and whose IP it is. Make it freely available. Make your value add is what is the best insight and information you can extract from all of that data collectively. So you still retain the competitive market, you still retain entrepreneurialism, but you allow the industry at large to move forward together. So,
Do you know? I
agree.
totally agree with that. And just imagine this. I was talking with a mutual friend of ours the other day, and he was talking about the American government, and I kind of just put this forward. What if, in putting forward bids for projects, one of the requirements was, you have to provide us the schedule data at every snapshot for the last 50 projects you've done. Just raw data. That was the requirement. And by the way, if you don't, no bid. Like you're not in, and I'd say for anything over $500 million or $1 billion in value, that's just a requirement. You have to do that. And or you could just say you have to provide us all the schedule files that you've produced in the last 24 months, like that kind of thing. And it's super private, and companies would have an allergic reaction to that, because suddenly their predictability would be very easy to see. You'd be like, but it would level, it gets past all of the, what I'd call the business winning bullshit, which is, we will deliver on time and we are a reliable, it's like, show me the data. Like, that's the kind of transformation that could be done where, and then in that point, what I'd probably imagine is that companies would very quickly start to properly use their data to understand this kind of stuff. And what you could do in this case, I'm just thinking out loud here, what you could do is do what the EU did with the emissions trading scheme. You could have a grace period where you say, you must submit this data, but no one will analyze it for any bids before 2026. But in 2026, the requirement's going to come in that it will be about predictability, and it will take from now till then as your baseline. So so it kind of gives them forewarning or something like that, and they get used to sending data, they get used to storing it, and they know that in the future bidding requirements will be based on it. Companies would get real smart real quick.
Yeah, agreed. Because it'll drive innovation, right? And I think also you could come up in this, as you say, we're sort of just spitballing here. You could even say, well, the more you contribute, the more access you get, something along those lines. But who knows? We can create all sorts of incentives. Look, we do want to reserve a little bit of time just to go through the different types of roles that are important for AI to happen. And again, I've used generative AI, I've used ChatGPT, and I've asked it for the main roles in the data field for critical or data-driven decision making within organizations. It's given me the top 5, and that is a data scientist, a data analyst, a data engineer, a business intelligence analyst. So what's the difference between that and a data analyst? And the fifth one is a machine learning engineer. So do you want to add anything or tell me that ChatGPT is wrong, or do you think those five are the top five?
I think that a couple of those are dependent on how you squint, are copies of each other.
Yeah.
Like you said, fundamentally, I'll just group them in my personal opinion.
Yeah.
So number one is you've got data engineers, and what data engineers do is they create the data sets. Okay, so they will set up the data warehousing, which is, by the way, a boom market right now. I was looking at Snowflake, and they did 500 million revenue, 1.2 billion revenue, and then 2.4 billion revenue year after year. So it's like that. So they set up the data warehousing and structure it, and essentially write the schema for the data scientists, so that it's super easy to call. Because if you don't have a data engineer, a data scientist will spend 90% of their time structuring data, and they will do it in a non-scalable way where they have to structure it every single time depending on the question you ask them. A data engineer goes, this is the schema, so they can call it really quickly. So that's number one. Then number two, I'd actually put above, which I'd call business intelligence analyst or something like this, which is, what's the question we're trying to answer here? Like, what's the business goal? Like, for example, that legal one where we're talking about those things, I'd be like, I want to cut my legal costs. I want to save 100K every 6 weeks. Like, it's the person who can basically take the situation, the pain, the implication, all of this kind of stuff and translate it into, so what are we trying to find out requirements? And then in the middle there, you've got the data analyst, the data scientist, whatever you want to call them, the person who runs numbers. And what they do is they take the specific question that's been set. So, for example, we want to save cost on projects. We've done some analysis and understood that low predictability is the driver of cost. Low predictability in cost and schedule. Okay, it's the driver of costs. The question, therefore, is what are the areas we need to focus on within cost and schedule, so really targeted, that are driving the large unpredictability? You'd give that question then to a data scientist who would then call the data warehouse, figure it out, and give you an answer. Then there's actually a fourth one I'd add in there that's not in that list, which is the product and user interface group. Because what you've just described is almost kind of a mandrolic back and forth system. But if you develop something that then you want to scale across an entire organization, you need to think about the workflow integrations and the prompts and the user interface, actually. And I don't mean like just making it pretty. I mean like literally what does it have to say so that someone on the other side of the world who hasn't had training understands what the hell they're looking at, like that kind of thing. And I'd say that's the kind of setup. So, if you and I are project controllers on a project, and we're the exact question, it's called, what is causing you to be unpredictable? This analyzes your data and tells you the specific WBS that's causing the most unpredictability in your forecast. Click this button to run an analysis. Like, I'll be like, okay, I get that. I understand what I'm looking at. But you can see, like, there's a business question been asked, there's a data warehouse been set up, there's a data analyst that's created the algorithms, and then someone's put that screen in front of you so you can click a button.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. The one I'd add to the mix that Chat didn't actually provide, and it's the systems engineer in engineering speak, right? It's call it what you want, solutions architect, whatever it is. Someone that understands the full landscape, which you're referring to.
Yep.
That makes all of these roles happen. Because if you do tend to do these in silos, then they may not all work together.
Totally. There is actually a role called a data architect, which you're right.
Yeah.
So in engineering speak, it's the systems engineer, but in data speak, it's the data architect. It's one and the same. You're totally right. That's the person who goes, well, we've got a commercial question, a HR question. It's not plugging together, and they try and plug everything together so it drives in some kind of, coherent direction. You're spot on there, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, so then it begs the question, I think, for those listening, going, well, in the construction space, when we're delivering projects, do all levels of organizations require all of these different roles? So, does the client require them? Does the main contractor require them? If I'm a construction company, subcontractors, do they require all of these roles? Is it a combined project, similar to a PMO, a project data office, if you want, that does all of this across the project? What's the answer? Do we know the answer? Are there different answers depending on
the
context?
answer really is it depends, but there are I'm not gonna scapegoat by just saying it depends. I'll actually give boundaries. So what I'd say is people do all of these roles today. So if you're a scheduler, you already are thinking about questions that are of business value. Like, milestones need to be on time, so I need to analyze that. They're doing analysis. Their data warehouse is their scheduling database, and they're creating presentations to present it to people. And if someone's good, they're thinking about a coherent story that goes across over time. So people are already individually doing this. The tipping point happens when doing those 5 areas, so the architect, the warehousing, so the engineer, the analyst, the business requirements, and the user interface and product, when that becomes a significant part of someone's job that isn't the role that they're in. So, if someone's going, I want to analyze 10,000 schedules, and someone's like, I'm going to literally spend all my time, 12 months of the year, just organizing this data. That's when you're like, okay, isn't a scheduler who would do that. It's a data engineer. And it normally happens at a point in scale of analyzing these questions. What I have personally seen is that when you've got project controls teams that are more than 10 people, you are already in the realms of now data engineering and data scientists. I'd say 5 to 10 is the tipping point for me. What have you seen?
It's tough, I think. I don't know in terms of percentages, but I think the thing that I'll add is that in my experience, because I started thinking as you're chatting there, as we go into these roles for organizations, where do you find these people? Yes, there is tertiary education. You get master's grads in data science, for example. But I find that you can teach a data scientist, data analyst, data engineer about projects and project controls far easier than you can teach a planner, scheduler, project controls manager about data analytics, data engineering, etc., etc. There is those that are curious, so those that have built massive spreadsheets in project controls, really interrogated the data in Primavera and understand, the data sets behind them and how resource tables and all these various other tables in the background come together. They will have a natural inclination to pick up the data side quicker. But, we've said it before, and we like to be a little bit provocative. The P6 jockeys that just data enter, they won't pick it up, right?
No, and you're spot on, actually. And this is what I found. So, I've built an organization that's 50 people, mainly data scientists and data engineers, and we've tried both. What we found is that it is 10 times easier to get a data engineer, a data scientist, and teach them projects than the other way around. And I'll tell you why that is. It's because what is the core unique skill sets that you need to fulfill the job? For the architect, the engineer, the data scientist, and the product owner or the UI, it is data engineering skills, which is fundamentally knowledge of data warehousing, databases. It's nothing to do with projects. That's actually an IT skill. The data scientist is coding in Python, IDL, GitHub management, like these kinds of scripts. Nothing about projects. product owner and product officers. That is an user interface. That is knowledge of design, Figma, Jira, nothing about projects. And the architect, arguably an architect there's actually a role called data architect, which you hire. The only role that I'd say needs to have specificity in projects is that business requirements person, because that's the person who can really critique, like, they know more about projects and are able to then explain it in a way that people who really don't need to know anything about projects can focus on. Now, in an absolute ideal world, would you have someone who deeply understands projects and deeply understands that job? Yeah. I can tell you there's about 20 of them in the world. Like, rare as diamonds. Like, and I'd say you're right. Like, and here's the question I'd ask. So imagine I'm doing an interview. Let's say I'm hiring for a data scientist. Okay. I've got 2 candidates. And this is a data scientist to analyze projects. I get a scheduler who's built macros in Excel. They know P6. Like, they are top notch. They know that kind of sums, etc. They don't know how to Python code. They don't know how to integrate with a data warehouse. They don't know how to work with Jira and product teams. They don't know the language that the data architect speaks, but they can understand business requirements, compared to the opposite, where I've got a data scientist that's got a PhD in astrophysics, has worked in banking and finance, etc., has published papers and models, knows how all those functions work, but doesn't yet know about projects. I'd be like, well, that planner, they're better in the business analyst role, because quite honestly, you can't do the job. You can't do the data analyst job. If it gets to that level of scale, if you don't have those people, you can see, this is why you see the tipping point matters a lot, because they can do it until a tipping point, at which point they cannot. They have such a deep understanding of the value that actually I'd put them at the top of the pyramid and be like, you're not a data scientist. No, you're going to have to train for another 5 years to get this job. But I'm going to put you at the top of this pyramid because you can decide what they do, because you know what's valuable, and translate it.
Yeah, I agree with that. And before everyone that's from the project controls PMO space thinks we're trying to do monger here, we're not. This I agree with you. There's still a space for schedulers, project controllers, risk managers.
Massively. This is talking about expansion in roles, not replacement of roles.
Yeah, absolutely. So where I'm going with this is you do need someone to understand that business case, and how that translates into the project context. And yeah, a data engineer, data scientist that doesn't have that specific experience won't be able to do that. And so you need a translator, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Another mutual friend of ours, when I worked with him a couple of years back, we actually, when BI first came to the fore, business intelligence,
Mm-hmm.
we said, well, let's do PI, project intelligence. And so I think that's what we're referring to here. But look, we're heading towards the end of the podcast, and we've covered a lot of ground. And I think, if Al and Val were on the show, they'd probably go, you guys are both talking rubbish. This is a different view. So we don't miss them too much on this episode, Greg, I don't think. But look, before we end, what are your final thoughts on data and the way it contributes to AI?
My final thoughts here. So there's 2 final thoughts. Number 1 is, I'm just super interested to see how these legal precedents play out, because here we're talking about the big boy. Like, we're little boys in the space, if you think about it. Like, where you've got the big boys like OpenAI, Anthropic, etc., building the fundamental models, and then you've got the people who've published enormous data online. Now, it's not. We're focusing on construction, which is a microcosm of that. But I think the precedent that sets is going to fundamentally change the direction of the world. Because if they go, no, you have to pay them, AI development is going to grind to a halt, and But if they go, no, you can, it's going to explode.
Yeah.
The second thought here is that, for the listeners, that actually they don't need to be in projects. It can be in any industry where you're looking at that. When we were talking about the roles and ownership there, I think, you can almost see where your organization is dependent on if they've hired those people, because hiring managers are, they have to normally jump through a lot of hoops and do a lot of research. So if you see these kinds of people come in, you know where your organization is on that hierarchy. So if you're a construction company who've gone, I've never heard of those people, you're probably at the back of the queue. Because I do know there's companies that have all of those people and teams and, are actually building their own AI, etc. And that, I just think that's a super interesting thing where you could almost just go on LinkedIn and see how committed people are to AI transformation by whether or not they've hired those people. And that's pokey.
Absolutely.
That is pokey, Dale.
It is, and maybe you're going to get sued now from LinkedIn for using their information, but who knows? let's hope not.
I'm not APIing it. I just want to say to LinkedIn, I am not APIing it. I am searching under your terms and conditions.
No, fair. Look, folks, that is the end of this episode, but hopefully you've enjoyed all of our discussion around data and what it means, the different roles around it. Greg, you summed it up fantastically well there at the end for everyone as well. But before you go, please help us with this episode, with this podcast. It is only episode 5. Like, subscribe, follow us, share. The key, again, just to remind you for this podcast is to just provide you with perspective. We have some of the top minds, me excluded, Greg, Al, and Val are those, and we are just going to share with you every couple of weeks. So keep the questions coming, keep the feedback coming, but thank you for your time. Until next time, bye-bye.